إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أن نقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها بث منهما رجالا كثيرا والنساء، واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم، ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. وبعد، وإذ قلتم يا موسى لن نصبر على طعام واحد فادع لنا ربك يخرج لنا مما تنبت الأرض من بقلها وقثائها وفومها وعدسها وبصلها، قال أتستبدلون الذي هو أدنى بالذي هو خير، اهبطوا مصرا فإن لكم ما سألتم، وضربت عليهم الذلة والمسكنة وباءوا وبغضب من الله، ذلك بأنهم كانوا يكفرون بآيات الله ويقتلون النبيين بغير الحق، ذلك بما عصوا وكانوا يعتدون. أما بعد، نستقى الحديث كتاب الله وسن الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري وأهل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربي زدني علما. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We begin praising and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything, because all praise and gratitude belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But specifically on the day of Jum'ah, we also praise and thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has brought us here in a space in which we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not just as individuals but as a community. And we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, through every day, but specifically on the day of Jum'ah, we come as a community. And the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, it was his sunnah, his way to, on the day of Jum'ah, speak to the community on what was happening in their own lives. And this weekend, we find ourselves in two crossroads. We find ourselves, of course, in the week of the July 4th weekend in this country, in which it's understood to be the weekend in which we celebrate the Independence Day of this country, which was yesterday, July 4th. And we are about to begin the month of Muharram in our tradition, which is actually the start of the new year, a month in which we could call it the month of freedom, but there have been many things historically that have taken place. Some great things, like Musa alayhi salam being freed from Fir'aun, and some very tragic things in our own ummah as well, such as the murder of the grandchildren of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah be pleased with them. So it's as we find ourselves in every moment, it's complicated, but it was the sunnah of our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say, be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because even through these complicated matters, there's growth to be had. And what I wanted to share today is actually a reflection on a theme of this weekend, which is, when you go anywhere, what do we celebrate on the 4th of July? Freedom, right? It's this idea of freedom. And I wanted to reflect on that. What does the Quran say about freedom? What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say about freedom? Because what is it that's plastered everywhere right now? Like things like the Declaration of Independence, that not 30-some miles away from here in Philadelphia, that a group of people got together on July 4th, 1776, and they'd said that people have been endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights: the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There was this idea that they are going to fight up and rise against those who are causing them tyranny, which was the tyranny of the British Empire, and this country was founded. And I would make the argument that actually that's something our tradition tells us to do all the time, to fight tyranny. The month of Muharram, as it comes in, one of the things that we understand about this month is the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam found a group of people in Yathrib who were fasting in Muharram. And he asked, why are you fasting? And they said it was because this was the month, this was the time in which Moses was freed and our people were freed from the tyranny of Fir'aun. And Musa alayhi salam, what does he say? Or not Musa alayhi salam, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, what does he say? Musa is closer to us than to you. We will fast, but we will fast twice. And inshallah, when that time comes for us to fast on the 9th and 10th of Muharram, we should do so, inshallah, because there's an immense reward for it. But it's this idea of freedom that's found here as well. But I want to share one specific instance in the story of Musa alayhi salam that makes us really rethink our notions of freedom. And this occurs after Musa alayhi salam has taken, through the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has been able to free the Bani Israel from Egypt. And he has brought them into a desert. And when he has brought them into the desert, they say to him, they've witnessed many miracles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already. Them being freed, all of the miracles involved there, the Red Sea splitting, Allah providing for them water, and then even from the heavens, there's manna and salwa. There's this diet plan that Allah gave them that consists of like protein and wheat, both that are coming down for them. But then they say to Musa alayhi salam, إِذْ قُلْتُمْ يَا Musa, they say to Musa, لَن نَصْبِرَ عَلَى طَعَامِ وَاحِدٍ. We can't put up, we can't be patient with just one type of food. Because what were they having? They were having the same food over and over and over again. Manna and salwa for breakfast, salwa and manna for dinner. The same food over and over again. And they said, instead do this, فَدْعُوا لَنَا رَبَّكَ. Call upon your Lord for what? يُخْرِجْ لَنَا مِمَّا تُنْبِتُ الْأَرْضَ call on your Lord so that the earth can give us, or he can call upon the earth to give us many things from the land. And then they answer with, what are these things that they want? They answer with just herbs like garlic, lentils, onions, cucumbers. These are what they ask for. And here, Musa alayhi salam responds to them and says, قَالَ أَتَسْتَبْدِلُونَ الَّذِينَ هُوَ أَدْنَى بِالَّذِي هُوَ خَيْرٌ. Do you want to replace what's better for you with what's worse for you, with what you have already, which is better for you? Because they're getting food directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they say, yes, this is what they want. That's what I first want to reflect on today, is this idea of what does freedom mean? The Bani Israel were free from the tyranny of Fir'aun, but were they truly free? And I'll give the answer to that being no. And I want us to think a little bit about this, that throughout the course of history, there have been nations that have taken over other nations. That has happened over and over and over again. Allah refers to that in the Quran. Allah talks about some of those instances taking place. But what happens when a nation takes over another nation? The first thing they do is a military subjugation. But then it's too costly to militarily monitor the average person. Once you've defeated their army, you're not going to set up a police state where their lives are being restricted. For the average person, you stop trying to subjugate them that way, and you instead start to subjugate them a different way by changing their thoughts. The United States went into Iraq. Right after the military campaign, there was another campaign called the Campaign of the Hearts and Minds that went out, which is what we need to change the way that they think. You see that in current day all the time, that you might have a certain country. Indonesia was conquered by the Dutch. Morocco was conquered by the French. You have all these different groups that conquered another nation. Where I come from, India and Pakistan were conquered by the British. And what happened? Eventually, what happened? The military occupation ended. But did the occupation end? I walk in, and I've had this experience before. If I go back to my country of origin, if I go to India, and I'm dressed like a typical Indian would be in a Muslim place, maybe with shalwar kameez, and I try to speak my broken Urdu, the person looks at me and goes, doesn't really serve me. But on the other hand, if I speak my English without an accent, what happens? Oh, come here, sir. We're here for you. Anything you want. Why? Because we're still subjugated. Is it freedom? Did we win our freedom or did we not? No, we've somehow actually been subjugated even so within the mindsets that we have. And that's one of actually the fundamental truths of our tradition, is to free people from the servitude of each other to the servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of us are going to be enslaved in one way or another. Nations, and this is where I say the founding fathers of this country, they talked about freedom, but they didn't go far enough. Because what was it? It was freedom from tyranny of one style, but what does Islam call us towards is freedom from tyranny of all styles. Not just the political tyranny I just spoke about, which what happens? Sometimes the political tyranny is so significant, you might want to say one thing, but you're afraid of what everyone else around you is going to say, so you're going to be changed because of reputation. You could be the richest man in the world right now, but the second that you think that the ads are going to run away, like Elon Musk, when the advertisers pull their support, he has to change his tune once again to submit to who? The whims of the people around him. You could be a politician who's at the highest levels of autonomy, apparently. But no, I have to make sure I speak in a way that's what? Caged by the people around me. That's not freedom. Or some of you might be thinking, well, those things don't apply to me. There's other forms of tyranny that also apply. What are those forms of tyranny? There are people out there who are slaves to their desires. I'm going to look at the young people who are like, I don't care about political tyranny. Well, what about this? When a new phone comes out and that camera looks slightly different than yours, the screen is 0.2 inches bigger, suddenly I look at my phone doesn't seem to be nearly as good anymore. What am I enslaved towards? The latest gadget, the latest innovation? We become enslaved to these things over and over again. And true freedom comes from what? It's actually enslavement to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When the Bani Israel asked Musa alayhi salam, can you send us these foods? Musa alayhi salam is very intelligent. And he recognizes, do you really want what's worse when you've been given what is better? Because what fruits did they ask for? They asked for the fruits of Egypt. They asked for the vegetables they were eating in Egypt. Because in Egypt, were they ever the top of Egypt? No, actually, they were the slaves of Egypt. But what starts to happen when someone wants to subjugate you, you know what they tell you? I know we're just stepping on you right now, but you're a part of us. They will never consider you part of their family, but they want you to think you're part of their family. That's what subjugation does. So they started saying things like, hidden in their statement is, we used to be part of the greatest nation on earth. You weren't a part of that nation. What were you? You were the slaves of that nation. But they still have this pride. So they're asking for what? The things we had back in Egypt. And Musa alayhi salam actually responds in a very intelligent way. Uhbitu misran. Return or go to Misran. In Arabic, Misra is Egypt without the tanween. Misran means go to any old country, nation, farmland. It says go there because what? You might have left Egypt, but Egypt hasn't left you. What happened? You might have escaped tyranny, but now you have a new form of tyranny, which is what? You just want to recreate Egypt again right here. You want to get yourself enslaved once again, even though you were saved from it. أحبطوا مصرا فإن لكم ما سألتم. Over there is what you ask for. وضربت عليهم الذلة. And if you remember nothing else from this khutbah, just remember this part, inshallah, which is Musa alayhi salam says, and what has struck you has been dhillah. Dhillati. Dhillatu. Dhillatu. Dhulul in Arabic, it could be translated in many different ways, but sometimes like a sickness, it's something lowly that has struck you. When you look into tafasir, they'll say, dhulul al-bayt, the lowest of a home. The worst of a home is what? The one that exists on the bottom of a valley. Because what happens? When it rains or there's any problems in any of the higher homes, what happens? They end up at your house, right there. Something that's the lowest of something. What struck you? Inferiority has struck you. Inferiority has struck you. You actually aren't fully free yet. Because if you were fully free, you would recognize what Allah has for you is actually better. Why I say this specifically today, when we talk about themes of freedom, is this is what our Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do over and over and over again. He would redefine for us what are these terms and how do we actually experience them. Because if we don't have the version that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, we have a broken version of it. That if you want true freedom, what would it have been? Actually, you're not trying to return back to what that subjugation you were already a part of, to recreate it in a different circumstance. No, you were supposed to go from the tyranny, the servanthood of Pharaoh, into the servanthood of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But instead, you're going from the servanthood of Pharaoh to what this system that Pharaoh had you to encapsulate yourself. And this time it's actually even easier. Last time it required guards and a military. Now you've subjugated yourself. It's actually cheaper to do this. Because what? The imprisonment comes from yourself. So instead, break free from it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues that actually this was something that was so significant that it caused them to earn the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. and even went as far as rejecting the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and killing even the messengers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ, without any right. ذَلِكَ بِمَا عَصَوْا وَكَانُوا يَعْتَدُونَ. And this was the reward that they got for their disobedience and their rebelliousness. But how do we recover from that? Is actually by doing what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us. Is where does true freedom come from? First and foremost, recognize you will always be enslaved. Who would you rather enslave yourself? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or your own desires? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the reputation of others? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or a political entity? Who should it be? It should be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you hold yourself of that, you free yourself from the shackles of this slavery, of this tyranny, and instead live in that peace that this tradition is all about. This Islam, which is what? A free submission, a peaceful submission to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because in that you will truly find peace. Second portion of the khutbah, I'll mention one or two narrations of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in which how he redefined these things for us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those that understand and appreciate what freedom truly is. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الحمد لله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. When we think about the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he represented freedom in so many significant ways of his sunnah. The easiest we could get to is the world at a certain point was handed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He had the opportunity to become a king if he wanted to. He had the opportunity of living lavishly when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him success. إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ. When the victory and help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came. But how did he choose to live? He didn't choose to live like a king. He had the opportunity of taking revenge, but he didn't take revenge. That's freedom. Because what? Who is he serving? He's not serving reputation. He's not serving his own desires. He's serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But even in terms of sometimes redefining terms for us, Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam once said, help your brother whether they are the oppressor or the oppressed. And the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were surprised by this. Not because it was different, but it was actually what they were used to. Because they had the disease of tribalism or the tyranny of tribalism, which meant what? Blood is thicker than right. Meaning, if someone's in your tribe, it doesn't matter if they are oppressing people or they are being oppressed, you help them no matter what. They're hearing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam help your brother, whether the oppressor or the oppressed, and they're like, is the Prophet confirming tribalism for us? So they ask the natural question. Ya Rasulullah, we know how to help our brother when they're the oppressed. How do we help them when they're the oppressor? And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam redefines for them what this term actually means, which is what? He says to them, by stopping them in their oppression. By stopping them in their oppression. You have a responsibility to stop them from doing what they're doing. That's actually true freedom, is even in a situation like this, the Prophet redefines for us what servanthood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks like as we have conversations, inshallah, with our family members. When themes of freedom and liberty start coming up, I want us to think about, how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala want me to be free, want us to be free? That's actual true freedom. We celebrate freedom. But what does freedom in our tradition mean? Isn't slavery from one system to another system. It's actually freedom from our own whims, freedom from the desires of other created beings, and instead submitting our will to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those who submit to the most appropriate means. Ameen Rabbil Alameen. Ibadallah, inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan wa ita'i dhil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkar wal baghi ya'idukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. أذكروا الله يذكركم ويشكره يزدكم وتقوه يجعل لكم مخرجا